Hey, how's it going everyone? Today we're going to have a bit of a discussion video. I will let some booster unpackings roll in the background so you have something to watch while we are talking about this topic. So last Sunday I went to the Belgian Nationals. I navigated Katsu, even though from all the playtesting I've done I felt that Briar was most likely the deck that has the highest win rate. I still went with Katsu because, well, I'm a huge ninja fan. Most of you know that already. I do a lot of historical ninjutsu research and stuff like that. So I went with ninja since that's the deck that really speaks to me personally, and that's the deck that I really wanted to navigate. I had a 4-2 finish. I managed to beat everything except the Rune Blades, and that brings us to the topic of today's video as well. What should be done about Briar? So I've been keeping an eye on all the results that have been streaming in from Nationals, and what I see is there is really a significant amount of Briar players making it into the top 8. And some people say like, yeah, it's because a lot of people are playing the deck right now. However, I feel if you really look at it, like in most metagames, like 17 to 30% of the metagame is represented by Briar. Some places a little bit extreme where you get like 50% of the people playing the deck. But when you then look at the top 8 cards, in most places, not all the places, some places the top 8 was very varied, so that doesn't really count. But in most places, when you look at the top 8, it's like mostly Briar in the top 8, like 7 out of 8 slots, and yeah, everybody seems to be loving this deck, and it's causing quite a bit of a problem in the current metagame. So personally, I'm not really a fan of banning cards because I feel these cards should be tested before they even printed. However, I do feel with Flesh and Blood being a relatively new game, in the beginning there can be some mistakes here and there, so getting a couple of bans here and there early on is not really that much of a big deal to me. But yeah, the Briar matchup is extremely difficult to counter. Like, even when I navigate an anti-Briar ninja deck, my win rate is maybe 40%, up to 50% against the deck, and this is against people of pretty much any skill level because the deck kind of plays itself, which kind of raises the question like, does LSS need to step in and ban something in the deck, and if they do, what should it be? So most people, when you ask that question, they seem to straight away go for the answer like, okay, then Ball Lightning needs to be banned, or stuff like Plunder Run, but I actually don't think those cards are the problem, because if you think about it, a Ball Lightning, it comes in for 3 damage, it's a 0-cost card, so even if you don't block it, it deals 4 damage, which is in line with pretty much any of the Go Again not haste cast, the Go Again cast like Scar for a Scar, which also deals like 4 damage and gain Go Again, so I don't really feel like Ball Lightning itself is that much of a problem, but I do see a bit of an issue that if you play a Ball Lightning and you follow it up with something like an Arcanic Shockwave, then suddenly your arcane damage also gets that +1 bonus, which pushes the opponent into the position that they need to pitch with their Arcane Barrier to stop the arcane damage, and they also need to somehow block the attack itself, which is usually not really that efficient to do, especially if you need to block with 2 cards instead of 1. So I think in case of Arcanic Shockwave, like a 0-cost that can deal 5 damage by fusing a light card, it's a bit too consistent, especially with a Ball Lightning. It will deal 7 damage, or will put 2 Ball Lightnings. You have a 0-cost card that's now dealing 9. I think that's a bit too consistent, so I think Arcanic Shockwave is one of those cards that personally I feel might need to get banned, or at least restricted. Like, maybe restricting cards would be a much better idea than straight up banning them, so at least people that do play a deck that do like Arcanic Shockwaves flavor-wise, that they still have the option to run like 1 or 2 copies in the deck, but I feel running 3 copies in a constructed deck of that particular card is a bit too much. Another thing that I seem to have a bit of issues with Briar, and I have been testing with all kinds of different builds lately, where I change a certain mechanic to see how it operates overall. And I think one of the things that might need to be changed is the way that Briar functions. Like if you look at decks like Lexi or even Ultim, you see that they have a very close tie-in to the elements. Like with Lexi, you need to flip a certain element face up in order to get one of the two effects. Same with Ultim, you need to pitch a certain element to get certain effects. So to me, it would make sense that in case of Briar, you need to play a certain element to get a certain effect. So if you play 2 lightning cards, for example, doesn't even have to be non-attacks, can be just generic lightning cards in general, like 1 non-attack, 1 regular attack, that you get a go again token after that. And with your Earth cards, if you hit that, you get that embodiment of Earth token that way. Because I feel right now that Briar is able to get all these benefits by pretty much just using generic cards, like playing 2 Plunderons, getting a go again token, and playing that into something like a Snatch. It's just a little bit too consistent to my liking. And that's where my main issue also is with Briar. Like, you do have decks like Lexi and Ultim that can kind of counter the Briar matchup, but they can only do so if they get lucky. Like, if their hand perfectly lines up that they can play something like a Frostlock, or they have something like a Blizzard in hand to stop a certain attack, then sure, those decks can perfectly navigate their way around whatever Briar wants to do. Same with Ninja. Like, if I can get my Soul Beat Strike into a Crane Dance into a Find Center, I got my Zen State token for 2 turns, and usually that's enough to put enough pressure on a Briar player to really set up lethal for the next turn. But yeah, that's where the thing is. If you get lucky, in my case, during my Nationals, I did get to set up my Zen State token, and then I ended up not finding any blues. I ended up not finding the combo pieces I needed to do my attacks, and thus I ended up losing against the Briar player on the spot, even though I had a very clear advantage. In the meantime, the Briar player had no consistency issues whatsoever, and they just kept on going on and on and on. Like, of course, you do have some bad Briar turns once in a while that you draw into like multiple non-attacks at the same time. Like, I've seen Briar players draw like 4 non-attacks and then they cannot attack in at all. However, those turns are extremely rare, and I would say they are much rarer than, for example, with a Ninja deck that you draw into a blue or a yellow card to pitch in order to do your attacks. It doesn't happen as frequently, so I do feel that in case of Lightning Briar specifically, that something needs to be done about the consistency of the deck. I actually don't really feel that Briar is much of an issue, simply because you do need to have a little bit of a consistency in your hands, that you need to have a blue in hand, you need to have certain cards in hand to do your combos, stuff like that. So in case of not Lightning Briar, in case of Briar, I feel the deck is rather balanced right now, even with all the generic triggers and stuff like that. It seems to function as intended, but Lightning Briar, I don't know, it just feels a bit too strong to me. Like, a friend of mine, Super Wormy, was even suggesting that maybe we should unban the Seeds of Agony so that Chane can kind of put Briar back into place, and then the meta can kind of shift back to how it was prior to the Seeds ban. But I don't know if that's the correct thing to do in this case. But it was an interesting idea nonetheless. So Super Wormy, if you're watching this, you had a fun idea, but I'm personally not a fan of it, because if we do unban Seeds of Agony, then we have a lot of decks that will not really be able to play again. And I'm a big fan of having a nice and balanced format where every deck is somewhat viable. They don't all have to be the best decks. There's always gonna be a best deck, or like a best trio of decks. That's just the way card games are. There's no way for a company to perfectly balance everything. But if we can get into a position that, let's say like we had previously, that most decks can pull off like a 55 to 60% win rate if they're navigated by a skilled player, I will be very happy already, because that way people can just play the deck that they want to play, and they can kind of just grow as a player, become better at the game, and the win-loss ratio is it's mostly determined by the skill of the player, not so much at how good the deck itself is. In case of Briar right now, I feel not much skill is involved, and you see a lot of relatively newer players making it into the very top with this particular deck, and I don't really like that. And one of the things that I also don't really like is, for example, at the Nationals in Belgium, we had 6 rounds before we got to the top 8, but I believe there were 72 players present. I was told that it's LSS that choose to make it 6 rounds. So LSS, if you're watching this, I don't understand why it had to be 6 rounds, because I feel when you have only 6 rounds before the cut to top 8, you don't really give the anti-meta decks a chance to put things like Briar in check. At least that's my experience, because if a Briar player with so few rounds doesn't meet an anti-meta deck early on, there's a very low chance that they meet it anywhere later in the tournament. But if we are in a format where, for example, we have like 8 rounds before the top 8 cut, I feel there's a much higher chance that players meet pretty much every single matchup that, how do you say that properly? Like that you meet a larger range of matchups, like a larger variety of matchups that you might actually end up against some stuff that you are bad against, like a Frost Lexi in case of Briar. So I feel having a bit more rounds before a top 8 cut, especially at a big event like Nationals, it's rather important to me. Like luckily at the Nationals, Kevin Lawrence became the #1 winner at the event, followed up by Thibaut as the #2, which are, in my opinion, one of the best players in Belgium. Both of them were, not surprisingly enough, navigating Briar, which is the best deck right now, in my opinion. But so luckily none of the top players got punished, and personally I wasn't really planning to go to the top anyways when I'm navigating a Ninja deck. But I do think there is some risk involved that if we have too few rounds in a big event like this, that it becomes more luck-based than skill-based. And I think the skill set of players is the thing that needs to be put to the test the most, and the best way to do it is to just have more rounds. Like maybe it was a logistics thing that we couldn't have more rounds simply because there won't be enough time to finish everything, because I believe the event ended at like 10 PM or something like that, even though it started relatively early. But maybe just split it into 2 days or something. I mean, it's a Nationals after all, right? So it's a big event. It's something that people are working towards the entire year. Something that I've been working towards a lot. And in the end, I kind of ended up throwing it by just playing a janky deck. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think that Briar needs to have something changed, or do you think the deck is fine as it is? I think that we might need a Organic Shockwave pen, and I also think that we might need an errata for Briar itself. And another thing that might need a change, but I'm not really 100% sure if it's necessary, is the way that the Rosetta Taunt functions. Like 1 damage for 4 resources. Like yes, it's situational that you need to play an attack and a non-attack in order to get that arcane damage. But in a deck like Briar, you're gonna do that anyway, so it's not really a punishment, right? It's like, how to say, like in a mill deck in Magic the Gathering, that you say like, if you put something in your graveyard, then my English is completely messing up. Like if you have an additional cost to put something into your graveyard, if you're doing self-mill anyways with graveyard shenanigans, it's not really a cost, but rather like something you will be doing anyway. So I don't know, like maybe the Rosetta Taunt needs a bit more, how to say, like maybe you need to play like 2 non-attack actions and an attack action card in order to activate it, even though that's again something that Briar is doing anyways, but at least then she wouldn't have that effect active all the time, which might make a little bit of a difference. But yeah, that's all I have to say. If you want to see my Ninja deck, I already put it on my Patreon, so if you're in the €3 tier or higher, you have access to that already. I do plan to do a video about it soon. Also, Superwarmer sent me a very nice article how he got first place in Switzerland with his Bravo deck, I believe. I will be covering that on the channel sometime in the near future. Like, he did a very nice write-up talking about all his matchups and how he navigates Bravo in general. Since he has a lot more experience with Bravo than I do, I will be using his knowledge to bring it to all you people very soon. And yeah, that's all from me for today. Thank you for watching, and see you all next time. Take care.